There are many misunderstandings concerning the teaching of the rapture of the church these days. And here to discuss some of the misunderstandings and in particular an interpretation of II Thessalonians chapter 2 is Dr. Andrew Woods. Andy Woods. I'll just call you Andy, okay? Mm-hmm. And Andy, you have prepared a lecture on II Thessalonians chapter 2, which is getting a lot of traction these days. A lot of people really love the way you present this particular section of the Bible, and I think you do a wonderful job, and that's why you're here. I want you to kind of expound on II Thessalonians chapter 2. Mm-hmm. It's an important passage.
Right. Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. But, you know, II Thessalonians is really written as one of Paul's earlier letters. Probably his third letter, and he's actually been pushed out of Thessalonica by unbelieving Jews, and he's in Corinth, and it's sort of like leaving your babies behind. He looked at these new believers as his children, you know, spiritually, who he had won to Christ, and they don't have a New Testament to consult. They don't have Prophecy Watchers TV to consult. You don't have any institutions or seminaries, and the guy that you've learned from, the apostle, has been pushed out, and lo and behold, they get this forged letter telling them that they are actually in the tribulation period, which I think unsettled them, because in 1 Thessalonians, Paul explained to them that they would be removed from the earth before the tribulation started. So there's lots of eschatological prophetic confusion, kind of like today. But you can imagine how that would be exasperated when you don't have a canon of the New Testament to consult.
Yeah, they don't have the New Testament. This is what, about AD 51?
51,
So it's early in Paul's writing period. So they don't have a New Testament they can turn to. No book of Revelation.
Right.
And the Gospels. So forth, and yet Paul has taught them something that we consider an advanced idea these days, and that's fascinating to me. They're kind of baby Christians who would tend to believe what Paul wrote to them, and naturally they would be a bit confused if someone came along and tried to sell another idea,
especially in Paul's name.
Yeah,
because this, when you go back to verse 1 and verse 2, it's apparent there's some kind of forgery, letter, spirit, prophecy, something allegedly coming from Paul saying the day of the Lord has begun. Now, they had learned the opposite from Paul. So Paul from Corinth writes to the Thessalonian believers. And I think what he's doing in chapter 2 is he's telling them you're not in the day of the Lord. Because if you were in the day of the Lord, you would see a sequence of events, like the Antichrist in the temple, and the Antichrist's miracles, and the Antichrist being overthrown by Christ himself. And right in the midst of it, he says this in verse 3, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come." Now that's in italics, which means that's been sort of added and to kind of smooth over the translation, but it's referring back to what was called the day of the Lord in the prior verse. "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." And it's this interesting phrase here, you're not in the day of the Lord because there hasn't been a falling away. And it's the Greek noun apostasia. And your typical interpretation of that these days is this is just talking about a spiritual departure. You know, the spiritual departure of the world to follow the Antichrist in the tribulation period.
That Greek word apostasia has been anglicized into our word apostasy. And so it'd be easy to kind of think of that in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Greek word says, and that's what the English word says, end of conversation.
End of conversation. And most Bible translations today, we can get into this a little later, but they translate it as some kind of spiritual departure. So a rebellion, a revolt. Some use the word apostasy.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is and that's the only view I knew for many, many years. But upon further study, there's a whole different view of this. That the noun apostasia could mean not a spiritual departure, but an actual physical departure, i.e. the rapture. Now, the reason this is so significant is it says the falling away shall come first. It's that Greek word proton. And if this indeed is talking about the rapture of the church, Paul is very clear that the rapture of the church occurs first. And that settles the long-standing debate, doesn't it, that we've had for the last several centuries on when does the rapture happen relative to the 7-year tribulation period. You know, as you well know, there's pre-tribulationalists, our view,
Mm-hmm.
mid-tribulationalists, post-tribulationalists, then you have pre-wrath rapturists, then you have another view called partial rapture, and it's a lot of confusion as you get into that debate. But if Paul is actually saying there's going to be a physical departure first, in other words, before the man of sin comes and the tribulation and so forth, then it's sort of game, set, match. You know, there's no reason to debate this anymore. So that's why how you define apostasia here becomes a big deal.
And many people use this as a proof text for the church going through the tribulation, which you and I don't believe. So we have then a major discussion underway here. How do you interpret this? And what we're talking about here is this letter from Paul, which acknowledges that there are forgeries circulating,
Mm-hmm.
apparently under Paul's name or some other authority, saying that, wait a minute, the day of the Lord has already begun, and the tribulation has already begun, and we're in it. And we then have to begin to behave a certain way, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
What would be your motivation for saying that the day of the Lord has already come and that you're in it? Would it be to gather followers unto yourself? In other words, you become a kind of a leader of
Mm-hmm.
a group of people, and you say, I'm the one that can sort of take you through the tribulation?
I really don't know what the motivation of the proponents of the false doctrine are, but I know the angelic motivation. It's always to cause confusion, and it's to undermine what the apostles have said. And there's always an agenda by Satan to remove the Church of Jesus Christ from apostolic teaching, because once we cut that cord, we fall prey to anything. So Satan somehow is using these imperfect vessels, the proponents of this false teaching, to bring confusion.
Okay, now, here's where it gets interesting. And your presentation on this is fascinating because you offer 10 distinct reasons why a particular term in the Bible is to be interpreted a certain way. Let no man deceive you by any means, verse 3, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. And this term falling away, translated from the Greek apostasia, is a fulcrum. Mm-hmm. It's a balancing point around which everything else sort of stands or falls. Mm-hmm. And you offer 10 reasons why that term falling away should be interpreted not as falling away, but as physical departure. Mm-hmm. It's talking about the physical departure of the church.
Right.
And you've studied Greek, and you understand it, and you understand the tradition of translation. So go from there.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the 10 points, I think Paul is just making a very simple point here. He's saying, you're not in the day of the Lord, you Thessalonians, despite what you've been misled to believe, because you're still here. In other words, your presence on the earth proves you're not yet in the day of the Lord, because there has to be a physical departure, i.e. rapture, before the day of the Lord starts. I think that's what Paul's point is.
Okay.
So now to these 10 points, why would I understand this word apostasia as a physical departure? Well, the first reason is there's always been spiritual departures. Today, you can talk to Mr. and Mrs. America about their local church, and they're upset that their own local church has spiritually departed. So how would a spiritual departure be some kind of, definitive sign, of the end times? And one of the illustrations, I like to use to prove this is Harvard College, founded in 1636. And you go back to its original doctrinal statement, and it says, "Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly expressed or pressed to consider the main end of his life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life, and therefore to lay Christ at the bottom as the only foundation of sound knowledge and learning. And seeing the Lord only giveth wisdom, let everyone seriously set himself by prayer in secret to seek it of him. Everyone shall exercise himself in reading the Scriptures twice a day, that he shall be ready to give such an account as his proficiency therein."
At Harvard. Now, I don't think the credo of Harvard is being observed today.
Yeah. And
so what's happened?
There's been an obvious spiritual departure. And, you can look on the evangelical landscape and see institution after institution that was started on godly principles that has departed. And this idea of spiritual departures is normative, sadly, in our age.
And so when you read it here in 2 Thessalonians, you're not looking at a spiritual departure would not be a unique event.
Yeah, how could that be a unique sign? It would be, just another day in the news.
Right.
So that's sort of my first reason.
Okay.
The second reason is this book of 2 Thessalonians is really one of the earliest letters Paul wrote. So he wrote Galatians first, most believe, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. And the last days apostasy is really not a massive subject in Paul's earlier letters. He does talk about the Galatian heresy, but that was an apostasy happening, right then and there.
Right.
But when he begins to forecast, when he begins to predict the last days apostasy, you really don't get much treatment on that until you get into the pastoral letters, particularly 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, and then Jude and Peter, written around that same time, get into that subject in depth. So it just seems sort of out of harmony that Paul would broach that subject so early on, when his custom is to deal with that subject later in his ministry.
And if you look at 2 Thessalonians as a letter, the whole letter, and we won't have time to do that today, but essentially the letter says, here's what's true, and I want you to wait patiently for Christ. Mm-hmm. That's the subject matter. It's really not talking about what's going to happen when people fall away from the faith. As you say, those are the later letters of Paul that deal with those subjects. Mm-hmm. But this letter is the patient waiting for Christ.
Because they were in the midst of suffering.
Yes.
And it's sort of hard for a suffering church to be apostate. And so it's kind of a different scenario in Thessalonians than when he starts to develop later elsewhere. By the way, I really think Paul really gets into the subject of the apostasy of the future when he begins to describe the last days of the church to the Ephesian elders at Miletus. He gives a tremendous speech to those elders in Acts 20. And around verse 26, 27, 28, right on through verse 31, that's when he begins to say, evil, from your own number men will arise and distort the truth. So it just isn't really a big subject that Paul deals with early in his ministry. It's really not until the third missionary journey that he gets into the subject of the apostasy. But the third reason, as you look at verse 3 carefully, in front of the word falling away, at least in the original Greek, the noun apostasia is a definite article. And traveling through the verse where it talks about the son of perdition, who we think is the Antichrist, there's a definite article there. So just like the manifestation of the Antichrist happens at a specific point in time, I believe he comes forth with the opening of the first seal, judgment in Revelation 6, the rider on the white horse. Just as the Antichrist comes forward at a specific point in time, the apostasia is not talking about some kind of gradual event, but it's talking about something that happens at a specific point in time, and that would better fit the rapture than a gradual spiritual departure interpretation.
Good point. And I agree. It makes the case. So where do we go from here?
Well, my fourth point is that apostasia can refer to a physical departure, and that's where people are confused, because the way this is typically handled is the noun apostasia occurs only one other time in the New Testament. It's over in Acts 21, verse 21, where Paul was accused of causing Jews to depart from Judaism. So there it very clearly means a spiritual departure.
A departure.
And so people think, well, that's what it means over there. That's what it means over here. But you see, words mean things based on their original context, or the context those words are found in. For example, take the word apple. How many meanings can we generate with the word apple? I could be talking about a computer. I could be talking about New York City, the Big Apple. I could be talking about a piece of fruit. I could be talking about the pupil of somebody's eye, the apple of one's eye. And so when I see the word apple in a text, what meaning do I supply? And the three rules of real estate are location, location, location. The three rules of Bible study are context, context, context.
Okay.
Context determines the meaning of words, because rarely is a word a technical word, meaning it always means the same thing everywhere it appears. So it's the same with this word apostasia. It can refer to a spiritual departure over in Acts 21, verse 21. But that's what it means over there. That's not necessarily what it means here. And when you look, I quote, in that presentation, I quote Liddell and Scott, which is a very, famous, well-known Greek lexicon. And Liddell and Scott indicate that, yes, the word apostasia can mean a spiritual departure, but it can also refer to a disappearance. It's actually listed there in their lexicon. It can refer to distance. So it's within the semantic range of the word to mean a physical departure. So it can mean spiritual departure, it can mean physical departure. So how do I figure out which meaning to supply? The context helps me.
And here the context is Paul attempting to console those who have been told something that isn't true.
Right, and if you go to the immediately preceding context, he says that, verse 1, "Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our what? Gathering unto him."
Yeah.
By the way, that Greek verb gathering is episunago, where we get the word synagogue, a Jewish gathering. And that's, what is our gathering to him? It must be the rapture of the church, which he's unfolded in the first letter, 1 Thessalonians 4.
A coming together.
Coming together, being caught up in the air, in the sky to meet the Lord. And so, therefore, in context, the whole context here is dealing with our gathering together with him. So when I see this word apostasia, I'm very comfortable applying a physical departure rather than a spiritual departure, because I have contextual support to do that. So,
A physical departure. Now, other people have mentioned this in the past from time to time. There's been a discussion for many, many years, but it's becoming a more important discussion right now. There are many people who are looking at the world today and they are seeing developing trouble out there. And they are concluding that the tribulation must be very, very near. And they're saying, okay, you're going to go through the tribulation. So I think this has become a powerful conversation just because of what's happening in the world today.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, the heatedness and the acrimony of the debate between the competing sides has brought this interpretation under great scrutiny.
Yes.
But if I'm understanding it right, this almost seals the deal for our side. There has to be a physical departure before the man of sin can ever be unveiled. So you're right, it does become a very big deal. Now, my let's see, where are we up to? I think on number 5, if I remember right. The fifth fact or point that I bring up is when you get into the verbal form of this word, and let me just back up for a second. Words have roots.
Mm-hmm.
And from that root, you can use the word in a noun form, or you can use it in a verbal form. Like when I say, you know, Jane went on a run. You know, I'm using run as a noun. But when I say see Jane run, I just convert it into a verb. So it's the same in Greek. You have this common root, and the noun form is apostasia. The verbal form is aphistemi.
Okay.
Now, let's focus on that verbal root just for a second. When you track aphistemi through the Greek New Testament, it's used 15 times. Only 3 times does it refer to a doctrinal departure. The remaining 12 times, which is over 3/4 of the usages, it refers to an actual physical departure. For example, Paul pleaded with the Lord, 2 Corinthians 12, verse 10, to remove the thorn in the flesh from him. Mm-hmm. We don't know what that thorn in the flesh was, but he actually wanted it to be physically removed from him. That's aphistemi. And
he wanted it to depart.
Depart, and he's talking there about a physical departure.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many, many examples I could give of this. For example, Luke 4:13, when the devil had finished every temptation, he left him for a more opportune time. That's aphistemi again.
He departed from him.
Physically departing. Luke 2:37, remember the elderly prophets there in the temple waiting for the Lord. It says, and then as a widow to the age of 84, she never left the temple, serving night and day along with fasting and prayers. And there left is aphistemi. She never physically departed. And we could go on and on reading verses.
There is ample precedent, and we're running out of time,
Yeah.
So we need to come down to the rest of your 10 reasons. Go ahead.
Well, continuing on, you know, we get to number 6, and since the noun and the verb can be used to refer to a physical departure, we've got to ask ourselves a question: what's the context here? And we've already dealt with this briefly. But the whole context here, we've already mentioned verse 1. Paul, down in verses 6 and 7, talking about a restrainer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I believe the restrainer is the Holy Spirit in the church. And Paul makes a point here that the antichrist can't come forward until the restrainer is removed. So the context is, again, the removal of the church before the man of sin can even manifest.
And you know, I think this point deserves some conversation because the church is the great restrainer. Wherever the gospel is not proclaimed, and wherever, for example, young children are not taught the Bible and grow up in Christ, you see a social degeneration. That is to say, and I think we're seeing it today.
Yes.
Generations growing up without knowledge of Christ are free to basically do anything they want to do. Mm-hmm. And that the restrainer then, or restraint, I guess, is the function of the church.
Mm-hmm. Whoever this restrainer is, he's got to be big enough to hold back Satan. Because Satan, according to this passage, is the Antichrist, rather, according to this passage, is Satan's man of the hour. Satan is going to perfectly express himself through the Antichrist, through counterfeit signs and wonders. So this restrainer has to be stronger than the devil. And only an omnipotent God can hold back the devil's hand. And therefore, I believe that this restrainer is the Spirit that lives permanently in the church. And so the Antichrist really cannot come to power until the church is physically removed. My only point in getting into all that is that contextually, there's tremendous support for defining apostasia not as a spiritual departure, but as something physical. It's within the semantic range of the word, and it fits the context beautifully. And I guess we could go over the other points in our next episode together.
We need to have more time to talk about this because this is a big subject. I want to talk about, for a moment, a book that Andy Woods has written. It's called The Coming Kingdom. It's a complete exposition and presentation of what the Bible says about the coming kingdom. This is a grossly misunderstood subject in our era, and that's why he wrote this book. And I find it explicit. I find it easy to read and absolutely startling in the way that he's put ideas together. It's very important that you understand the coming kingdom. And this book, I think, will help you more than any other book I've ever seen, and I do not say that lightly, called The Coming Kingdom. And also, we are going to offer with that today on the basis of our discussion, Defending the Rapture. I recently had a long conversation with Dr. Thomas Ice. Tommy Ice and I turned out a DVD here called Defending the Rapture, and we go into a lot of what Andy and I have been talking about, but from a different perspective. You can order the Rapture package from our online bookstore. Just click on it, prophecywatchers.com, online bookstore, scroll down, and you'll find the Rapture passage. By the way, we're still offering a charter subscription just for a limited time to our magazine, The Prophecy Watcher. For $100, it's a charter subscription. For as long as you live, you'll continue to receive The Prophecy Watcher. And by the way, it's going to have great articles in it. Dr. Andy Woods has provided an article for our May issue, and it's going to be on, guess what? The rapture of the church. I can't wait to read it. A one-year subscription of The Prophecy Watcher, $19.95. And you can find it in the online bookstore, prophecywatchers.com. Just click on it, scroll down, and you'll find the Rapture passage and information on how you can become a charter subscriber to our magazine. Andy, I wish we had more time, but we're going to come back and we're going to hit this again and pull the little strings all together and into a nice package. I think your presentation of the pre-trib rapture of the church is right up there at the top. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it, and it was good being here. Thank you.
And we'll talk to you again.
Good.
I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, you keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.